There were no telephone messages and headquarters did not disturb NAI TER's detachment that night. At dawn, a squad armed with 3 machine guns and 3 two-wheeled carts set out along the road leading out of the city, past rows of dead, shuttered suburban houses. NAI TERS deployed his unit around the Polytechnic School, where he waited until later in the morning when a cadet arrived on a two-wheeler and handed him a penciled signal from headquarters. Guard the southern highway at Polytechnic and engage the enemy on sight. NAI TERS had his first view of the enemy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when far away to the left a large force of cavalry appeared, advancing across an abandoned, snow-covered army training ground. This was Colonel Kazir Leshko, who in accordance with Colonel Toropot's plan was attempting to penetrate to the center of the city along the southern highway. In reality, Kazir Leshko, who had met no resistance of any kind until reaching the approaches to the Polytechnic, was not so much attacking as making a victorious entry into the city, knowing full well that his regiment was being followed by another squadron of Colonel Goznenko's Cossacks, by 2 regiments of the Blue Division, a regiment of South Ukrainian riflemen and 6 batteries of guns. As the leading horsemen began trotting across the training ground, shrapnel shells, like a flock of cranes, began bursting in the heavy, snow-laden sky. The scattered riders closed up into a single ribbon-like file and then, as the main body came in sight, the regiment spread itself across the whole width of the highway and bore down on NAI TER's position. A rattle of rifle bolts ran along the lines of cadets. NAI pulled out a whistle, blew a piercing blast and shouted. At cavalry ahead. Rapid, fire. Sparks flickered along the gray ranks as the cadets loosed off their first volley at Kazir. Three times after that the enemy batteries sent a salvo of shrapnel raining down against the walls of the Polytechnic, and 3 times more, with an answering rattle of musketry, NAI TER's detachment fired back. The distant black lines of horsemen broke up, melted away and vanished from the highway. It was then that something odd seemed to happen to NAI TERS. No one in the detachment had ever seen him frightened, but at that moment the cadets had the impression that NAI either saw, heard or sensed something in the distance. In short, NAI gave the order to withdraw toward the city. One platoon remained behind to give covering fire to the other platoons as they pulled out, then withdrew in turn when the main body was safely ensconced in a new position. Like this they leapfrogged back for 2 miles, throwing themselves down and making the broad highway echo with rifle fire at regular intervals until they reached the intersection where Brest-Litovsk Street crossed the highway, the place where they had spent the previous night. The crossroads were quite dead, not a soul was to be seen on the streets. Here NAI TERS selected 3 cadets and gave them their orders. Run back to Polovaya Street and find out where our units are and what's become of them. If you come across any carts, two-wheelers or other means of transportation retreating in a disorganized fashion, seize them. In case of resistance, threaten the use of firearms, and if that doesn't work, use them. As the cadets ran off and disappeared, the detachment suddenly came under fire from ahead. At first it was wild and sporadic, mostly hitting the roofs and walls of houses, but then it grew heavier and one cadet collapsed face down into the snow and colored it red with blood. Then with a groan another cadet fell away from the machine gun he was manning. NAI's ranks scattered and began a steady rapid fire at the dark bunches of enemy troops which now seemed to be rising out of the ground in front of them as if by magic. The wounded cadets were lifted up, white bandages unwound. NAI's cheekbones stood out like 2 swellings. He kept turning his body more and more often in order to keep a watch out on his flanks, and by now his expression betrayed his anxiety and impatience for the return of his 3 messengers. Finally they arrived, panting like foxhounds. NAI looked up sharply and his face darkened. The first cadet ran up to him, stood to attention and reported, gasping. "Sir, there are none of our units to be found at Shuliavka, or anywhere else, either." He paused for breath. We could hear machine gun fire to our rear and just now enemy cavalry was sighted, apparently about to march into the city. The rest of what the cadet had to say was drowned by a deafening shriek from NAI's whistle. The 3 two-wheeled carts galloped noisily off down Brest-Litovsk Street, then turned down Fonernaya Street, bouncing along over the rutted snow and carrying with them the 2 wounded cadets, 15 cadets unscathed and armed, and all 3 of the detachment's machine guns. This was as big a load as they could carry. Then NAI Turs faced his ranks and in a clipped, hoarse voice issued them with orders they had never expected to hear. In the shabby but warmly heated building of the former barracks on Lvov Street, the 3rd Company of the Ist Infantry Detachment, consisting of 28 cadets, was growing restless. The interesting fact about this uneasy party was that the person in charge of it was none other than Nikolka Turbin. The company commander, Staff Captain Bezrukov, and 2 ensigns, his platoon commanders, had left for headquarters that morning and had not come back. Nikolka, who as a corporal was now the senior ranker in the company, wandered around the barrack rooms, now and again walking up to the telephone and looking at it. So it went on until 3 in the afternoon, by which time the cadets were growing demoralized from a mixture of nerves and boredom. At 3 o'clock the field telephone squealed. "Is that number 3 company?" "Yes." "Put the company commander on the line." "Who's speaking?" "Headquarters." "The company commander isn't back yet." "Who's that speaking?" "Corporal Turbin." "Are you the senior rank?" "Yes, sir." "Get your squad out onto the street and into action right away." So Nikolka mustered his 28 men and led them out along the street. Until 2 o'clock that afternoon Alexei Turbin slept the sleep of the dead. He woke up as though someone had thrown water over him, glanced at the little clock on his bedside chair, saw that it was 10 minutes to 2, got up and began stumbling about the room. Alexei pulled on his felt boots, fumbled in his pockets, in his haste forgetting first one thing and then another: matches, cigarette case, handkerchief, automatic pistol and 2 magazines, buttoned his greatcoat, then remembered something else, but hesitated. It seemed shameful and cowardly, but he did it nonetheless. Out of his desk drawer he took his civilian doctor's identity card. He turned it around in his hands, decided to take it with him, but just at that moment Elena called him and he forgot it, leaving it lying on the desk.